name is Jackie, and I'm here at Hub City Bookshop with three wonderful authors, and we're so excited to have them. So we have Audrey Blake, which is a pseudonym for Jama Fixon and Regina Soroy. Is that right?
Soroy.
Soroy. Okay. And then we have Tracey Enerson Wood here as well in conversation with them, and we're so looking forward to it. So I'm going to give them a quick introduction and then hand it off to Tracey. If you have any questions, just type them in the chat window and we'll take them towards the end of the conversation. All right, so Audrey Blake, as I mentioned, has a split personality. She's the creative alter ego of Regina Soroy and Jama Fixon, two authors who met online in a survival-style writing contest. They live 1,500 miles apart, but both are prairie girls. Jama hails from Alberta, Canada, and Regina from the wheat fields of Kansas. Both are addicted to history, words, and stories of redoubtable women, and agree that their friendship, better and longer lasting than any other prize, is proof that good things happen in this random, crazy universe. Tracey Enerson Wood has always had a writing bug. While working as a registered nurse, starting an interior design company, raising two children, and bouncing around the world as a military wife, she indulged in her passion as a playwright, screenwriter, and short story writer. She has authored magazine columns and other nonfiction, written and directed plays of all lengths, including Grits, Fleas and Carrots, Rocks and Other Hard Places, Alone, and Fog. Her screenplays include Strike 3, Rubling's Bridge, The Engineer's Wife is a USA Today bestseller. It was her first published novel, published last year. Other passions include food and cooking and honoring military heroes. Her co-authored anthology cookbook, Homefront Cooking, American Veterans Share Recipes, Wit, and Wisdom, was released in May 2018, and all authors' profits would be donated to organizations that support veterans. A New Jersey native, she now lives with her family in Germany and Florida and loves to travel. So be careful giving out casual invitations. She will show up anywhere. And she was more than happy to come online with us today. So thank you so much, Tracey, and I'll let you take it from there.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Hub City Bookshop, for hosting this today. This is a very, very exciting day for Audrey Blake, also known as Jama Fixon, of course, and Regina Soroy. And I'm so thrilled to be here with you tonight. I actually was very fortunate to get an ARC of your book some months ago. Here it is, The Girl in His Shadow. And I absolutely loved it. And it was like so up my alley. You know how people will pick a book, but this was, picked for me. I was, asked to do it, and I was like so thrilled. I'm like, oh, it's like me. But I absolutely loved it. It's a fascinating story. And I have some questions, and then we'll also take questions from our audience members as well. But the first most burning question, of course, is how did you two meet? I understand it was online, but how did you get together and start this wonderful adventure together? And tell us a little bit about yourselves.
All right. Well, it's kind of an old story because it started almost 10 years ago. But Jama and I were both stay-at-home moms who both were really passionate about writing and had tried writing our first novel. Didn't have any idea what to do with this attempt that we had made. And back then, there was a contest that Amazon hosted called the Amazon Breakthrough Novel Award. And 10,000 people from around the world could enter their novels as long as they hadn't been published by anyone. And Amazon did this thing where they would review, go through all of them, and they'd whittle it down from 10,000 until finally you get to a point that there's 50 finalists, and they are all looked at by editors and readers and reviewers, and they're graded and judged and sent out to the public to look at these. And well, Jama and I both got from 10,000 to the top 50, and we had no idea. We'd never met each other. And I love getting to tell this story because I get to tell you what Jama's really like. So we were in this contest, and her friend had read my book. She had seen it in the contest. She had read it and really liked it and told Jama about it. And Jama read my book, reached out to me in an email. Remember, I'm a complete stranger to her and a complete stranger to her friend, other than like a good job on your book email. And she writes to me and she says, I read your book. I think it's beautiful. And I think you're going to win. I'm cheering you on. And that's what she says to me, a complete stranger. And I read that and I thought, who says that? Who does that? Who is that selfish? And so I was selfless. And so I was so excited to write her back. And so I, picked up her book because it was up online that you could read it and vote for it and all these things. And I read hers and I was both thrilled that this writer had written to me, and also my heart sank. And I turned to my husband, I'm like, I know who the winner is. This book is unbelievable. I'm like, she can do things with words that I just can't do. And I'm like, she's so nice. I can't even feel bad about it. I'm so glad she's going to win. It's beautiful. So from that moment on, from that contest when we met, we started just writing back and forth. And then eventually it was, hey, would you mind looking at my current project for me? And it got to a point where we were the only other person, I was the only person she would let see her work before the world saw it, and vice versa. And when I had something, I'd send it to Jama and say, help me make this better because I trust you implicitly. So that is how we came to love each other's writing. And then it was one day we would go back and forth. She visited Kansas. I'd go up and visit. We took our families on vacation. She took me to Banff to see Lake Louise. We took our children. We had so much fun. And I had been reading some history books, and I had stumbled into this world of medical history. And I was talking to Jama about it, and I was like, if there was ever material for like the best novel, it is in these books. But I said the research, I don't think I could do that. It would take me a decade to do that kind of research. And she's so intelligent. She's a walking encyclopedia, and she's so great at historical novels. And I said, but if you helped, what if we did it together? And she said, yeah, let's do it. Like, no hesitation. And so we sat down that day and started sketching out our ideas and our plot and our characters. And I still have the Post-it note where we were scribbling in our little talking session. It's still up on the wall of my office to remind me of great things that happen randomly out of the blue.
Wow. that is an amazing story. I hadn't realized that you actually got together and did all that and got to go to Banff, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
It is beautiful.
So, Jama,
Regina's being modest. Yes, Regina's being modest. She won the contest.
Oh, really? Wow.
And it was so exciting.
So Regina won, and Jama, you were right.
I was right.
So you both win.
I still think
amazing.
Jama should have won, but yes, it was. I'm just the contest that came and that went. But Jama's been in my life for 10 years, so that was the real gift of that contest.
Truly amazing. So Jama, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I didn't plan to be a writer. It just seemed really practical. So I did a degree in health sciences, much like yourself, Tracey. So I'm an occupational therapist and you're a registered nurse. And I'm working as an OT again now, but when I had 3 littles, I stayed home and just needed something to do. And I'd always loved, I'm a pretty compulsive reader. And writing is, you never have to like look at picture of someone else's writing and be like, oh, this is like a Pinterest fail. Like, you're never looking at someone else's thing. It's always yours. So if it's not great, it's just because of you. And I found that so rewarding. And the more I did it, the more I loved it. And that's why I came to writers. Regina minored in creative writing in college. So she kind of had a longer vision than I did.
Yeah. I'm wishing now that I had a Jema and a Regina. I'm like, oh, how cool would that have been? Because it was kind of
Right.
all on me. And when I screw something up, I got nobody but me to blame, and you guys have each other
Uh-huh.
to blame. So,
It really
although,
changes things.
yeah, and to balance, I mean, I had wonderful, wonderful critique partners. I'm joking, but really, what a really wonderful way to write and to have some medical background. I'm sure that was helpful for you.
Yes.
I can't remember if Jackie mentioned it, but my next book is The War Nurse. So I got to
Mhm.
use some of my, yeah, thank you, Becky. Uh, I got to use some of my nursing knowledge writing about a nurse, although, of course, it was a completely different era, which, brings me, of course, to your book, The Girl in His Shadow, which takes place in mid 19th century London. Very, very different time from now, of course, and it's all about the field of medicine. And it really takes us back to that time, and I know it just made me sort of gasp sometimes with the things they had to go through. I mean, right out of the box, we have people dying of cholera, just
Yeah.
an amazing, amazing book. So let me just read the little blurb so we can, for those who haven't started it yet, which it just came out today. So it's probably most of you. Um, this is a blurb on the Girl in His Shadow by Audrey Blake. Raised by an eccentric surgeon, Dr. Horace Croft, parents after losing her parents to a deadly pandemic, the orphan Nora Beatty, knows little about conventional life. While other young ladies were raised to busy themselves with needlework and watercolors, Nora was trained to perfect her suturing and anatomical illustrations of dissections. Women face dire consequences if caught practicing medicine, but in Croft's private clinic, Nora is his most trusted and secret assistant. That is, until the new surgical resident, Dr. Daniel Gibson, arrives. Dr. Gibson has no idea that Horace's bright and quiet young ward is a surgeon more qualified and ingenuitive than even himself. In order to protect Dr. Croft and his practice from scandal and collapse, Nora must learn to play a new and uncomfortable role, that of a proper young lady. But pretense has its limits. Nora cannot turn away and ignore the suffering of patients, even if it means giving Gibson the power to ruin everything she's worked for. And when she makes a discovery that could change the field forever, Nora faces an impossible choice: remain invisible and let the men around her take credit for her work, or let the world see her for what she is, even if it means being destroyed by her own legacy. So, wow. All right, so here's a question. Nora is a fictional character, but is she inspired? She is inspired by very real women from the past. Who are some of the real women you discovered in your research that made an impact on this story?
I'll start that one. Regina, take over when I get tangled up. There's a lot of amazing women that were inspiration for Nora. One of them is Anna Maria Manzolini. She was actually a lecturer of anatomy in the late 1700s at the University of Bologna in Italy, and she began working with her husband, who was a professor at the university, and so she was an anatomist and also made wax anatomical models used for educational purposes, but they also were works of art. And so she toured all of Europe and visited like the royal court in St. Petersburg and everything, showing these models and doing these demonstrations. And so there's, a small number of women that, because they kind of had a family in either through a father or a brother or a husband, became, real lights in the fields that they had chosen. Caroline Herschel was a German-born but British, lived in Britain, astronomer actually, and so her brother was an astronomer, and so that gave her entree into that scientific field. So, you know, it was pretty limited, but you could kind of sneak in through the back door if you had a family connection. And that's what gave us the idea for Nora is, you know, there were female surgeons in other countries, but none in Britain, not for another 20 years after we wrote this story. And even then, women weren't allowed to treat male patients, only women and children. And that was until, you know, the era of your book, The War Nurse, Tracey, which I'm sure you know, but I lost my train of thought. Anyways, so there was no Nora, a British woman who was a surgeon that we could find at this time, but we could see that it would have been possible, and that if she was there, she would have really kept her secret pretty close.
Yeah, when it comes to the women in history, we don't know. Like, they were there. They were there, and their impact is felt through the ages. We know that these women had to have had propensities and talents and things that they did, but it's not, history hasn't handed us their names and all of the facts. So what we have to do is just piece it together. We have to piece it together from the stories that have survived, of the women that tried to break into these fields where they just had a natural talent. All they wanted to do was use their talent and expand and just learn and grow and contribute. And it's such a natural impulse, but it was something that just wasn't open. And so we're trying to honor the women that we don't know. We don't have their names on paper, but they were there. We know they were there.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're two women after my own heart. To me, it's one of the most amazing, wonderful things about historical fiction is to find these lost stories and piece together, even though, you know, so much is undocumented, because when something was done by a woman, a lot of times the credit, of course, would go to the man. Otherwise, you know, nothing would happen. So we know this happened, but you know,
absolutely, like in The Engineer's Wife, I had no idea that
yeah,
Emily Warren Roebling was such a figure.
Yeah, I didn't
she
either. And
accomplished so much.
I grew up close to there, and you went and was like obsessed with bridges and high things, and just never knew that story. I mean, I'd heard kind of barely of the Roeblings, but yeah, but it is, to me, that's what historical fiction, especially what I consider sort of women's historical fiction. In my mind, there's a bit of a difference, because a lot of historical fiction written by men tends to focus on, you know, wars and politics and overthrowing governments and that type of thing. Whereas the women's story is usually, it is what fascinates me, because sometimes they're behind the scenes, many times behind the scenes doing all kinds of amazing things. Sometimes they were right in there doing this stuff. So it's up to us as historical novelists to discover those stories and bring them out and in an entertaining way, which I think you've both done. I have a follow-up question for something you said, Jema. One of the characters was inspired by someone who is making anatomical models. And I had the great privilege of going to an amazing museum in Florence, Italy, that had a huge collection. And it was, I mean, you know, I'm a trained nurse. I think I know quite a bit about anatomy, but I learned so much in the 2 or 3 hours I was in that museum. It was almost like hand-on, you know, because basically they kind of took apart cadavers and redid them in very minute detail. So I was wondering if you were able to get your hands on something like that in your research, because you did have such vivid descriptions. It seems to me that, you know, if you didn't watch an autopsy, at least you watched some videos of them or something.
I did, as part of my training to be an OT. So I did take gross anatomy. We did the full cadaver dissection. So I do have that experience, although I didn't like Love it. Like Nora did. I found it kind of traumatizing.
Yeah, Nora was a little different.
A little different. The wax models, we had planned to go to Bologna last year, 2020, and obviously that didn't happen. But I did see some wax models, as well as the ether inhalers, the surgical tools, just another of other instruments at the, what is it
Hunterian.
called?
The Hunterian.
No, the Hunterian School of Medicine was closed when I was in London, but it was
right.
The Science Museum in Oxford. So they have all those vaporizer machines, and they've got the pill presses that they would use to make pills, and these scary looking saws, and yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
Yeah. Well, there's nothing to replace, actually seeing and, getting close to these things and just see it. They're scary. I mean, it's scary looking stuff, but I think it, that experience just makes you even better writer. I mean, we're good at imagining, but boy, having that hands-on experience to me, and hey, I never actually got to do an entire autopsy like you did in school. So, but yeah, and I don't want to scare people by, who may be squeamish. The book isn't scary. It's just it's very it's mind-bogglingly, I can't say that, but just the depth of it, and it just wraps you up, and it doesn't let you go, and that is, it's a sign of great writing. So kudos to you. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question here. What were the most surprising details you uncovered in your research process?
Okay, the research, I think, was like the most fun part about this book, because it was endless how fascinating it was. We actually, Jama and I, a lot of our time that we spent in research was reading medical journals of the day. So we went through case by case by case, and we're there with them. Like, the doctor's describing, this was my treatment, this is my treatment. We're like, did they live? Oh no, he died. Often, oh no, they died. Sometimes it was, I can't believe someone survived that. But the thing that strikes me the most about some of the research that we came across was how many times something had to be discovered before it was discovered. And people say, well, wait, ether was invented in 1540. Why didn't they just start using it on surgeries in 1540? And this process of discovery, especially in a world where there's not communication and shared communication between people, there was literally someone who had figured it out. There would be people that figured something out that was like the clue to this huge question in medicine, and it got lost. Like, there was a man who discovered germs. He discovered germs. He watched the little bacteria. He called them his little friends. It was in the 1600s, and he would watch these little things, and he'd do experiments. What killed them? What kept them alive? How do I feed my little friends? He was there. He saw germs, and it got lost. Like, just goes by the wayside, and everyone's like, what was that all? I didn't hear about that. So,
or he didn't put it together with causing
didn't
disease.
put it together.
That's another
right.
leap. Yep.
It's another leap. So to me, it was, people will say, why didn't they? Why didn't they?
Yeah.
Because it just didn't travel. The knowledge didn't travel. It had to be discovered over and over again before we had it as a people and a culture.
And even sometimes they would discover something, but they didn't know why it worked, and so they just wouldn't say anything about it. So there's records of a physician surgeon in rural Georgia, long before Morton did his famous demonstration of ether in Boston that kind of started ether. So he would use ether in his surgeries, but he didn't know why it worked, and so he never published anything about it. So, like, you've got some backwoods doctor, like on the cutting edge of medicine, who could have changed the world maybe a decade before it actually changed. And, you know, he was just like, oh, okay, I don't know why this works, but it does.
It does, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, the Hippocratic Oath, it says, do no harm. And there's an amazing scene in the book where basically Nora knows what to do because, you know, she's done it on, practiced it on cadavers, but this was a real patient. And there's no way they would have tried it except for the patient was going to die otherwise. So it's like, you know, now it's, you know, I won't give it away what it was. Now it's a common operation. Obviously you would do it to, you know, save someone's life or perhaps just put them out of pain, make them more functional, but you're not going to do that unless it's a life or death thing.
Yeah.
So.
Which
And
is
boy,
why
did they
so
do
many.
a lot of harm.
Oh, they did a lot of harm.
They did.
But that's why so many surgeries failed, because they were the last resort. So
Right.
it's when the tumor is so big that you can't move that arm or that leg or that. So because it was such a last resort, such a traumatizing experience, of course they didn't work. People were brought in half dead already and said, fix it, when it was almost certainly too late. So it was just, it's a time so full of emotion for me that it's so easy to just pull from any story that we'd read about and just feel it. It makes the material so rich.
It is. It is. I keep gushing over it, but you guys haven't read it yet. You're going to love it. Oh, I like this question. Okay. So as co-authors, what does your brainstorming look like? And most important part, do you ever disagree on what direction to take? I love a little conflict, so let's get into it.
We started, you know, we had never done this before, and we were just kind of like, let's do it. And, you know, Regina told you she put the idea to me, and I said, sure, but I did make one stipulation, and that was that we didn't write in first person, because that's not my wheelhouse. And Regina was just like, yeah, okay. So that's kind of how things have gone. Like, there's not a lot of disagreement. We generally talk things through. We have the post-it note with the character names and kind of what we want to happen, and we make an outline, and we kind of, okay, so we need to do a scene with this, and we need to do a scene with this, and this scene should be in this character's point of view, and this scene should be in this character's point of view. And we assign them based on who is feeling strongly about them, like who's already visualizing what's happening and who's feeling lines of dialogue just coming into their head already. And then
so it was like scene by scene, like you would write a whole scene on yourself, and
sometimes, but sometimes not, because sometimes, you know, Tracey, you write 1,000 words and then you get stuck and you just don't know where to go.
Yeah.
So then when we get stuck, and this is the best part of having a writing partner, is you can just say, I'm stuck, fix it.
Yeah. I'm so doing this, my next book. That's it. Anybody out there want to write a book with me?
Don't say that loud, Tracey. We'll write a book with you.
All right, I'm in. How about you, Regina?
Yeah, she just described it. We were friends, close friends, long before we ever became business partners. I don't even think we think of it as business partners. It's creative partners. And so we already had that friendship and that trust. And I already was her biggest fan. I love what she writes. It's beautiful. It's captivating. It's talented. And so for me, it was a no-brainer that I could trust her, that when she said, I'm feeling this, like, almost 99% of the time, I'm like, yeah, that would work. That would totally work. That would make it better. So you asked when we disagree. It doesn't happen that often. But the process that we've come down to, like, let's say Jameis says, I want to get rid of half of this scene. I think it's slowing the book down. And I say, oh, I really don't. I think it's really important. So what we'll do is we'll come together, we'll FaceTime so we can see each other face to face. And she'll say, what is it that you really need from that scene? Why is that hard for you to give up? And so I'll just give her my most detailed, this is what I really would hate to lose. And I'll say, why do you think it's slowing it down? Why do you most think we need? So what we get down to is the core of, it's not about a paragraph or a scene. It's about what is important to you for that story and that character. And so then once we get down to the real and true desires that we each have, we can usually work with that. She can usually say, okay, I think that scene needs to slow down, but that thing you need to keep, I think we can move that right here. And I think we can keep that in its whole entirety. And I'm like, oh, I'm happy with that. And she says, I'm happy with that. So we do our best to keep everything that is important to the other person, always.
Yeah, I think, Regina, I think you've pointed out something that's really important in writing a novel, and something that I didn't know when I only read novels and didn't write them, but it was an important lesson I had to learn, and it's familiarly known as killing your darlings. Have you heard that phrase, killing your darling? And that's basically what you were saying. And you read, all the books on writing will tell you, there's just scenes that you love because you slaved over it and every word is perfect and it's amazing. And you are totally in love with this character, this scene, this whatever. And yet it doesn't, maybe the arc took a turn or, it's too wordy or too slow or too fast in that point. And it really needs to go. And you'll get people say, yeah, that, and you don't do anything unless at least 3 people tell you usually. But like this is a darling and I have to kill it for the betterment of my story. But the lesson I learned was that it's not necessarily always true. What I found is that when someone, points out that that's a darling, it doesn't fit. The problem is sometimes it doesn't fit there where I put it, or it doesn't fit in the amount of detail I gave it. Maybe it needs to be a paragraph. Maybe it needs to be early in the book, later in the book. So that's what I learned is if you're fighting hard for that darling, don't give her up because there is probably a reason where some piece of it needs to be somewhere. And you had each other to bounce off of, and that's an amazing. But for anybody else who's, striving to write a novel and you hear that advice, listen to it with a grain of salt, get, 3 different opinions and go through the analysis. Like Regina was saying, why is this so important to me? Why is it important is it important to me personally and not really so much for the book? Then there's something missing in the book. There's a connection missing. Maybe that's the problem. So really, really an important point, and something to look for in books as you're reading them. Sometimes, you're reading a great book, and I know I've been reading some absolutely wonderful ones lately. And then there's just like a slog in the action and you lose your interest. And now as a writer, I realize a lot of times there's a darling in there that didn't get murdered. Or better yet, didn't find another, didn't get adopted out to somewhere else. So. Okay. Well, sorry for going off on that tangent there, but it's actually it's
true.
an important point.
It's so true. And it's so fun to hear how other writers like deal with that problem and that process and that realization that, I love this and it's not helping my story.
Yeah, but cherish what you have going on with each other. That's very, very difficult to replace. And I do want to put a little shout out for Source Books, of course, our both of our publisher. But I understand that Marie Benedict is doing the same thing, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the other author. But and of course, she's done the Carnegie's Maid and the other woman, the only woman in the room. But now she's gone together with another author, and I think in another book, 2 other authors. So I think you're onto something here. I want to join in. Speaking of which, do you have favorite? Yeah, party. Yeah, I mean, it's just having people to bounce off of who really understand, who get your story. My husband, he's like really tired of hearing about the engineer's wife, and if he never hears the name Emily Roebling again, actually, he's a very fiction kind of guy. So,
Mine
but
too.
yeah,
Jeff only reads nonfiction and gritlit. If there's not a
and
con going on, he
and
doesn't want to read it.
yeah, but I get it. The different strokes for different folks, right? But I love me some fiction. I think it's the most important thing, in the world as a civilization. I mean, if we didn't have that, like I said in my dedication, without all the readers and all the writers, all is lost.
True.
So who are your favorite authors and books?
So I love classical books. Like, I love them. So my favorite book of all time is All Quiet on the Western Front.
Classic.
And it's really funny when James said she doesn't want to write in first person. It was so I made a collection of my favorite books one day, and I realized these are all first person. Jane Eyre, Moby Dick, All Quiet on the... No wonder that's how I tell a story, because every story that has just gripped me in my life, I capture the castle. I love it. Jama has turned me on to Eva Ibbotson, who is beautiful historical author. I love the classics. I love diving into the classics, and I reread and I study and I go back to find what I couldn't find when I was 20. I just love them.
Yeah, reading them again, I found, something I read, back in high school or college is completely different after having, a few decades of experience behind me.
Yeah.
It's really amazing to rediscover old favorites, or some classics for the first time.
Oh, I have to say, like, my non-classic books that I have read so many times they're falling apart are my James Herriot books. The Yorkshire Vet in England. Like, I practically have them memorized. Those are when I just need a soft place to fall. When I'm not in the mood to study a book and learn, I just want to be transported to the place that I most want to be. That's where I want to go.
Yeah. Lake Wobegon, right? Lake Wobegon.
He was, his Yorkshire books in England, they're fantastic. And you find this whole different breed of person there, and it's fascinating.
How about you, Jama? Favorite books?
We read really differently, and maybe that's why we work well together as writers. I read pretty much everything. I just read a lot. Right now I'm reading, I usually have a mystery on the go and a rom-com. Right now I'm reading Anthony Horowitz's Magpie Murder, which is so clever. I'm loving it. I'm reading Wendy Moore's No Man's Land. So this is your territory, Tracey, because it's about the war nurses and the surgeons in the Great War. And but like I'm really not selective. I'll pick up pretty much anything.
Okay. All right. And
I don't have the patience to read Moby Dick.
Oh yeah, after the first page, forget about it. But I do have to ask, having written two that we know about novels in the first person, well, do you not like writing it? Do you not like reading it? What's your deal with the first person?
I feel stuck. I'm loving the books that I've been reading that use partial third person. So Greer McAllister's The Arctic Fury, she uses first person for the contemporary timeline and third person for the Arctic expedition, which is some months in the past. Or Anthony Horowitz in The Magpie Murders, he's writing first person for the protagonist, or the detective, Susan Ryland. And but then he goes into the novel within the novel, which is this Christie-esque detective story written by the supposed Alan whatever his name is. So he's got first person and third person. They're both serving different things, but yeah, I like being able to go into other people's heads.
Yeah.
More than one person.
It's a hugely limiting thing, and first person, as I discovered when I first wrote The Engineer's Wife, I think I had 4 different points of view, and because there were just scenes
that
that
really
had
surprises me, Tracey.
well,
It works so well in first person.
well, thanks.
Like,
that was not easy, but I had written it that way, and because there were certain scenes, like for example, early scenes in the caisson, which so much happened, and they had to be written in Washington's point of view. But I talked with a very well-known editor very early on. He said, "No, it all needs to be in Emily's point of view. Get rid of all these other ones." And I'm like, but I can't. There's all this stuff that happens that she's not there for. And he says, "You can do it."
yeah.
So go forth and spend the next 10 years. So that's why I'm really interested in it. To me, it's a really interesting dilemma, basically, because you must choose. And so when I started the Warners, I had every intention of writing it in third person, and that's how I saw the story. But yeah, probably just one point of view, only in Julia's point of view, and but third person, so that I could just have a little bit more freedom. And I'd write and I'd write and I'd write. And then, like the next day, I'd usually read over what I'd written the day before. And I'll be darned if it didn't keep turning back into first person.
I never have that problem.
Well, yours probably turn into third person. They've turned into third person on you. It's like just, to me, it's a story calls to be what it needs to be. And if you just, start writing it, it will naturally happen, and there isn't much fighting it. So, in your mind, Jema, obviously, you saw it as a third person story. The way, and it totally works. It's hard for me to imagine that story in first person. So, well done.
I mean, maybe a third book, I'd have to let Regina have her way and learn something new.
Yeah. I think writing is it. That point of view is kind of like being right-handed or left-handed. Like you kind of tend to one or the other. And a few writers are ambidextrous, and good for them. But most of us tend to want to use one. So yeah.
You're ambidextrous, Regina. You can do it. You can whatever she wants, and it's
you
great.
Can do it. and you could. It just, it's exercising a different part of your brain, and that's to me one of the most amazing things about writing is sort of using all kinds of parts of your brain. What is it? Normally, you only use like 10% or something. That what they say. But as a writer, I mean, you had to learn a lot about medicine. You had to learn about London. You had to learn about, cholera. I mean, so many things, and you're using so many different skills that I think it's just wonderful for our minds. And we're going to, our bodies are going to give out way before our brains do when you're a writer.
Definitely.
So what advice would you give to other aspiring writers?
For me, I say write for yourself. I think don't try to write with a goal of I want to sell this to this person or sell this many copies and I have a question when I sit down and I start writing, and my question to myself is, can I make this beautiful? And can I make this meaningful? And that is the question that goes through my head. And I write so that it would be beautiful and meaningful to me. And I just hope that if it's beautiful and meaningful to me, that will extend to someone else, that I'm not completely alone in the world, right? In my opinion. So.
Yeah. I think that's very, very pertinent advice. How about you, Jema?
I think you have to, for me, I guess, and maybe for other people, it's hard to say, you have to like who you're writing about, because you're going to spend a lot of time with them. So, you have to care about your imaginary friends. And I mean, if you can write with a friend, that's even better. But I do feel very lucky. Like I feel like it was, pure serendipity that brought Regina and I together. Because, I live in Canada, she lives in Kansas. Like, how did that happen? But it did. And I am so grateful.
I know everyone's going to want to write with Jema, but I claim her. I'm not giving her up.
I want both of you, though. I'm not picking choosing. I'm thinking the three of us. You can have your names first. I'll be way at the bottom. W, I'm always last anyway. Right?
Not even. Not even.
I have to ask something I talked about earlier, and that is how difficult, or we talked about earlier, is how difficult Nora's experience was, because she's a woman. Not only all the things we talked about in medicine, not having the communications, not having so much knowledge, not having but also on top of that, of course, being female and being forbidden by law from doing a lot of things. Do you feel that any of that still exists in today's world?
Well, obviously not in the same way, right? Like a woman can certainly be a doctor. So it's certainly not the same way. I think it's going to depend where you are, right? Our world is a big place with a lot of different circumstances. So there might be a place where a woman is not at all limited by her gender. Like, she has every opportunity and she's welcomed. But that might not be the experience of somebody somewhere else. It could be like they're on a different planet for all we know. So yes, I think, of course, it's still a problem. I don't think it's as universal a problem. I think that there are a lot of places in the world where women are extremely valued now, and our contributions are listened to, and they're not belittled, but that's not universal, I'm sure.
Jema, would you agree?
Yeah, it depends where you are and who you're with. And there's a lot of circumstances, unfortunately, in our society that need revising. I do think we've made progress for women, and I like to think we could make similar progress in other areas. I am particularly drawn to the conflicts about women, well, because I am one, but also, if you've read Yuval Harari's Sapiens, he talks about, humans' tendency to discriminate based on race, based on, a whole variety of different factors. But gender discrimination is one that, it's very hard to find a culture or a time when there wasn't gender-based discrimination. And so it's interesting to me that has been so universal in the human experience, no matter where or when you lived, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, women have always had the babies, and
it's certainly not
creating
the biggest problem
creating
in the world
the next
today or ever.
Creating the next generation. So
one.
that's, since always. So that's, that some of it is biological, but yeah, I think we've made just tremendous progress, but there's still a little ways to go.
Yeah.
Well, I have
definitely. And progress in other areas too.
Yeah. I have just one more question for you, but before I ask that, I wanted to ask if you had any questions for me.
Yes. So, engineer's wife, when she was going to be arrested for wearing pants. It's so crazy. How did you find that out?
Yeah, it was actually true in New York City and many other places. In the time, it was actually illegal for women to wear pants.
It's like so crazy. And when I read it, I just felt like this shock moment, jaw drop, but also like a yes moment, like, wow, what kind of research?
That's why Amelia Bloomer, that's all true. Amelia Bloomer invented the the bloomer costume, as it was called then, to sort of get away with it, and had little, the little pantaloons underneath the skirt. So technically she's wearing a dress, but still could, go out and do things without, dresses are very limiting. So good
Tracey,
question.
I have a question for you. Last year, when your very first novel became an NYT bestseller, I want to know where you were and how you responded to the news.
Well, it actually is a USA, USA, not US.
USA Today.
All right, help me this. Help me with this.
USA Today.
Thank you.
Yes.
USA Today bestseller, not NYT. And that actually just happened, a week or two ago, I think, when it hit that list. And actually, I think I was out walking my dog, and I was expecting a phone call. And so I had my phone, which I don't usually do that because I'm into the moment and I'm walking my dog. But it was, I could see it was a message from Anna, my editor, and that's, all I saw was USA Today, but I'm like, ah! My poor dog thought, I've been,
Did you drop your phone? Did the screen break?
Something, yeah. So it was very exciting, something like you were saying, Regina, I wrote the story. I had to write the story, like you felt it, you found this story and you had to write it. And I wrote it because I was sort of obsessed with it, and I had to explore this in this time, and yeah, sure, I would, like it to be a book. I'd like someone out there to read it, because they could share my obsession with me. But it was mostly, I really, really wanted to tell a story. So for that to happen was like super duper icing on the cake.
Congratulations.
How did you find Emily? Yes, congratulations. How did you find Emily? Like, where was the seed?
How are we doing on time, Jackie? Because it will take me at least a minute to answer that question. So how are we doing?
Go ahead and answer, and then if you don't mind, there's a couple audience questions.
Okay, all right. Be forewarned, I can talk. So I was actually writing plays, and I had this idea of writing a play about a family that was in a multi-generational occupation that was passed down, as it was and still is today. They had this occupation that was passed down from generation to generation, but the occupation was very dangerous, and it killed or could have killed somebody. And I wanted to write this story looking at the sort of the dynamics of that in the family. And a little background, I'm in a military family. My son was at the time in Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere. And my husband is Army. My son-in-law is active duty Navy. My father was an Army veteran. So kind of surrounded by this. And my son went in the Army, I'm sure, much following in his father's footsteps. It's what he knew, it was, so there, and he had a very dangerous job. So that's what I wanted to write. And so I wanted to write about I grew up in northern New Jersey, and I was always fascinated with the skyscrapers in New York City. And we used to go up to the top of them all the time because it was cheap and we could do that. And my father just liked to go up to the top of places. So I wanted to write a story about those, the guys sitting on the girders. You've seen those pictures. They're 100 stories up in the air and they're kind of swinging their feet and, eating a sandwich. So I thought, well, what if, I can find a family that's what they do. And like that the father is like the job supervisor, and he tells the kid to go out there and he's feeling a little dizzy that day. And so that's what I wanted to write. But I didn't find the architect's family. I didn't find, something in New York building the towers that fit, but I found the Roebling family. And I found, John Roebling, who his dream was to build the Brooklyn Bridge, and then handed it down to his son, who then, of course, became incapacitated, passed over to his wife. So once I found that story, and then I found it was Emily, oh my gosh, Emily, who saved the day, a woman that nobody knows about. That's when the obsession began.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. Writing a book takes a lot of time, correct? I mean, you're saying you started this process 10 years ago. And I think it's really developed me a lot as a reader, a lot in my understanding to realize what all goes into this book. And I advise anybody who likes to read to try to write a novel. Just see what goes into it, to see all, how do you have a plot, and then you have subplots that are wrapped in and turned around and tied with a bow at some point. And you need character arcs for every character. And there's just so much to learn. And like I was saying before, so much of your brain that you get to use, that it is truly, truly an amazing experience. So thank both of you for your time. And actually, I did promise you one more question if we still have time. We still have time, Jackie? All right, one more for you guys. What comes next for Nora? Is there a sequel? Are we going to have another book about her? Or is it going to be something different? Yes?
Yes, Nora continues her journey, and it's exciting, and it is already turned into source books, and we are working on edits right now, and her story continues, and it is a vibrant story.
Awesome. I'm very, very happy to hear that. And I'm hoping I'll get an arc again. Please.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right, Jackie, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Hope I didn't yak too much.
Oh, no, you guys have been absolutely wonderful. What a fascinating conversation. Thank you. I loved your questions, Tracey, and Jayma and Regina have been so gracious in their answers. You actually answered most of the questions just as you went along, which is awesome. One of the questions, I know, you guys, it's like you knew. One of the questions was, what is the next book you're working on? So you've already turned in the next book about Nora. Is there another book on the horizon for you guys together or anything, or is that too soon?
We're still working on book 2 of Nora. So we're still in the thick of that. And it's been a year. So Audrey Blake will need to take a nap after this book is finished. And then when we wake up, we'll figure it out.
Well, we'll keep an eye out for the next book after this one. I'm really excited about that. And I know Becky, who asked the question, ordered your book through our ticketing and is really excited to read it. So thank you for letting us know there's
Hi,
another
Becky.
Hi, Becky. Thank you. I hope you enjoy it.
So, and the other question was what you guys are reading right now, which I know Jayma answered, and I don't think Regina said what she's reading currently. So do you have a book that you're reading right now that you want to talk about?
Right now, I am working on Year of Wonders by Geraldine Brooks, and it is a book about the 1649 plague. It's beautiful. It's first person. I'm telling you, it's a problem with me. All the ones that captivate me.
Yay, first person.
I love that you guys have such complementing talents. That's so perfect. So thank you. I did put in all of the current book recommendations from the authors in the chat if anybody wants to check those out. Becky says she can't wait for the second book. And also the writing advice that you guys were giving, all three of you, was really appreciated from everyone in the chat there. They were talking about how much they appreciate it. And someone else, Carrie, is reading Year of Wonders right now. So
it's really good.
I'm going to have to write these down too so I can read it. So I think that's pretty much it. I just want to give a little shout out again to The Girl in His Shadow. This is a beautiful book, just all around gorgeous. And they did send us, they're signed by both authors, which is very exciting, by these little matching book plates. I'm super impressed that you guys passed it around from so far away and managed to get them signed from both of you. So if you want a copy, we have the signed copies and they're gorgeous. So check those out. And you guys have been absolutely amazing to talk to, and congratulations on your pub day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes. Thank you, Hub City.
We were happy to. Is there anything you guys want to wrap up with?
I think just that we hope that anyone who does read it, I hope they're as captured by these people as we are, because there are a lot of real stories and real experiences woven in, and I hope they feel amazed at these people like we did.
I love that.
You're gonna love it. You're gonna love it.
Thank you, Tracey.
All right. Well, I think we'll say goodnight for now, and please do check out their book. They're both wonderful, of course, as you can tell from talking to them, and the book is amazing. So can't recommend it enough.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
All right.
Thank you,
Tracey.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Tracy.
My pleasure.
Tracy.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time. And yeah, Tracey, thank you. Those wonderful questions. We appreciate you taking the time to come on. And we are also looking forward to Tracey's new book in July. So we'll keep an eye out for that. All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Thanks
Good
again.
night.